So this is the third Unscripted Bal Harbour talk for the year, and I'm nervous. This one's very exciting. And the reason why I'm so nervous is that 10 years ago I came to Miami to work at the Rubells, and I was an intern there, and so it's exactly 10 years, almost to the month, that I am seeing them here again. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak. It means a hell of a lot to me and a lot to the group. Hank Willis Thomas, a lot of you do know. Hank Willis was actually an advisor for the Unscripted Bal Harbour art program last year. He has been a great friend to the program, and he also agreed to come down. And Hank, it's wonderful to welcome you. Thank you so much. I do need to thank the hotel. Is this place not absolutely exquisite? It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. We could have not have wished for a nicer place to be. Bal Harbour Village, the Mayor and Council, thank you so much for supporting these talks. It's such a gift to be able to invite such great guests to come and speak. So a little bit about the talk format. We're going to actually hand over to Hank, who's going to speak to us for about 10 minutes about his work. And then we're going to invite the Rubells to come and ask him some really hard things. If you did valet, just to let you know, the hotel has very kindly offered to discount the cost. Please just let them know that you came to this talk, and they will very kindly let you pay a little bit less. So without further ado, I know you don't want to hear me speak, I'm going to hand over to Hank Willis Thomas.
I was like, who do they want to hear speak? It's really, really great to be here. I often like to start actually a talk with an exercise that kind of exemplifies what I'm really thinking about all the time, but it requires artist participation. You all being the artists with your cell phones. So if you pull your cell phones out. Those of you who are on social media, whatever form of your choice, I'm going to actually take a photograph on the count of 3, and then all of you all are going to take a photograph of me taking a photograph of you. So you ready? 1. It also looks cool with flashes too. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Wow, this is crazy. Wow. So, and then afterwards, you should post it to, I'm going to post this one to Twitter, and hashtag it, so pound tag it with Unscripted Bal Harbour. And instantly what we're actually going to be doing is making an instant exhibition for everyone who's not here to see what we're doing. And what I find so fascinating about this present moment is that we can actually create images and document things from so many different perspectives that we actually really get a much broader perspective of an event, of anything that's happened. You all, they put out some seats. Lisa, there's some seats over there. Come sit down, anyone who wants them. But yeah, and there's also these 3 really major important aspects of my life that are really attached to here, especially to Bal Harbour, because my father lived here for at least 12 or 13 years with my late Russian Jewish stepmother from Brooklyn. And had during so many of my formative years. And then Christina Rodriguez, who was my first friend in graduate school, was the person who coordinated my first solo show at Diaspora Vibe Gallery in Miami. And then I had this monumental moment down on the beach at a party Kahende had where I came up unfashionably early to a party, and the only 2 people there were Don and Mera. And just, we wound up speaking for maybe like 4 hours because we just like, they were curious. What I love about getting to know the Rubells is that I think the fact that it's called the Rubell Family Collection is not a coincidence, because I do think it's not just about collecting art, it's about collecting family. and the artists that are in the collection, but also the relationships that you have with them is so fascinating and amazing. And it just keeps growing and expanding. And it's just so wonderful to see him. So I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you, Claire. Thank you all for inviting me. And all things being equal, that's basically what I'm really interested in thinking about and talking about is what is equality. And when I go back looking at, I am a photographer, I'm the son of a photographer and curator, and I look at the very early work that I was doing in undergrad, thinking about photography and what one person talked to me about, it was visual sovereignty, kind of the ability to talk for yourself. Because I often think about how when we take photographs, there's more things happening outside of the frame of a photograph than there are inside the frame. And each photograph is really a manipulation of the hand. And we often think of them as truth and as documents. And I'm really interested in complicating those ideas. And with some of the work that I've done over the course of the years, they really exemplify that. This is a piece called "It's All Your Fault, It's Not Your Fault," which is a lenticular print, which basically, as you walk by, you can't see it from one place. You can only see it as you walk past it. And I'm really interested in making work that kind of blurs the lines between what we think is correct and what we think we know, thinking about hybridity. This project that I did with Sanford Biggers is with this character, the Wayfarer that we created, who's half black, half white. And when you look at the image framed, it's blurry when you're standing in front of it. And so the only way to actually see it clearly is standing from the side. So there's this really way in which the work requires you to have to move around to actually see it. And that's how I feel about virtually everything, including myself. But also made a lenticular print. This one says, ads imitate art, art imitates life, life imitates ads. This is like I think the new vicious cycle that kind of we all prescribe to. Like for me with my iPhone, that is probably an ad as I'm trying to talk about making art. And increasingly I think about all of the way that we live as related to a corporate structure. And I'm really fascinated in the ways that our identities become branded. And so I did a series of work called Branded, thinking about how African American men especially are commodified in popular culture, but also how in general we all live in an age of branded consciousness. And I was thinking also about how the idea of ascension is chained to ascending through sports and entertainment. And this is, and also more recently did a work that really speaks to things that are happening right now, actually. This is a piece called Cotton Bowl, and it's really about, this is someone wearing the Ole Miss uniform and thinking about a sharecropper, thinking about the NCAA, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, which is college sports, fueled off of the free labor of the descendants of slaves, and many of them working on the same fields that their ancestors, harvested. And there's this amazing kind of combination between that and that time and this time, but also thinking about this is a piece called Priceless, which is my cousin was murdered in Philadelphia in the year 2000, and I had this really amazing personal experience of being he's my big brother figure, my closest friend, even to this day, which is strange. I went to call him the other day, and he's been dead 15 years, so that should tell you how close I am to him in my heart. But I was, and we were in the funeral home, and here he was on a table, and we had to pick the casket and the right suit, and there's this thing of, there's a $7,000 casket, and a $5,000 casket, and a $2,000 casket, and there's this unspoken thing that, you couldn't afford to love him enough if you bought the $2,000 casket, and perhaps you loved him more if you bought the $7,000 casket, all of which was going to be thrown into the dirt, never to be seen again. And so even in mourning, we were still being marketed to, and I couldn't help but to think that either way it was going to have to go on a credit card. And I think about advertising, there's this amazing ubiquitous language that is so underused for its true power. It's one of the only languages that actually you don't have to speak one language to understand. So you'll see the same logos, the same symbols, the same ads in North Korea, in South Africa, in Peru, and we can still understand them even if we don't speak the language, and that's what's so fascinating about it. And so I'm really interested in using that language to talk about other things. But someone gave me this, and this is actual in the ad for a 2001 Toyota RAV4. Someone gave it to me, and they were like, you should do something with this. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this. After 4 years of thinking about it, the only thing I could do was this. And basically, I realized that once you remove the advertising language, the last thing you think this is an ad for is Japanese cars. And I started to think about what happens in advertisements. And like, for instance, what do you guys think this is an ad for? Pancakes. Do you recognize the person in it? Joe Frazier, heavyweight boxing champion. It's actually an ad for margarine, the Blue Bonnet. But what's so fascinating for me is that, you know, when you see this ad, unbranded, you actually start to really can't help but to make this association to the mammy figure, to Aunt Jemima. And I think when we think about the heavyweight boxing champion of the world being in any way conflated with that in this ad is really fascinating. And so I started to really think about how maybe truth is better than fiction. And by looking at ads as the truth and removing the text from, I could really see what's really being sold. Like, this is an ad from 1974. What do you think this is an ad for? It's actually an ad for the dresses. And the text said, "Are you the right kind of woman for it?" The Mistress Collection. And there's so many fascinating complications that happen when this ad, like when you think about what is really for sale here, and speaking especially about that time. And so I was making this work. I probably had 5 or 10 of them at the moment that I met Don and Mera, and I'd made the branded work, and they were like, "So what are you doing next?" And I said, "I don't know." And then we talked a little bit, and then I got a call from my gallery, Jack Shaman, and said, you know, the Rubells were interested in your unbranded project, and they want to know how many more you're going to do. And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, "We have to come up with some idea." And I said, well, I really have always wanted to do a piece that talks about a timeline. And so I decided that the project would be called Unbranded Reflections in Black by Corporate America from 1968 to 2008. And thinking of it as like kind of this way of tracking blackness as a corporate idea over the course of 1968. 1968 being the symbolic end of the civil rights movement to 2008, which I just thought would be like 40 years, and happened to be bookended by the election of Barack Obama and the year that you guys decided to do 30 Americans. So it became this kind of monumental timeline. But what I find so fascinating is that these images of black identity are primarily influenced by quote-unquote white males' notions of what black people value. And so this is this way in which the work kind of grows out of collaboration with the family and with the other individuals, but also started to really think about how that image inspired my current project that I'm calling crudely right now, Unbranded White Women, but which is really this kind of exploration into what I think is fascinating, that African American men especially got the right to vote, but they couldn't really vote until the 60s, but in 1860s. But women in the U.S., no matter what their ethnicity was, didn't have the right to vote until 1920. And as we are kind of 100 years ago was kind of the beginning of the suffrage movement catching its stride, and we can start to think about kind of what might be happening in the near future, and how this kind of, I'm interested in constructions of identity and kind of whiteness as an identity and femininity as an identity that's ever changing, because, you know, back then Jews weren't white, Italians weren't white, Irish people weren't white, and so I think of whiteness as this amazing blob, which in some ways, you know, African Americans are even moving into, some people might say. But I started really thinking about, like, what happened, what is this an ad for? Yeah, but what is really being sold? What's the story here? It was called The Triumph of Europe. But so I was really so I've been working on that project, but also really thinking about political statements, and I could talk about any piece for very, very long, but I'm trying to talk fast, so forgive me. But basically, I've had this explosion in my own kind of creativity, and thinking about kind of what a gesture is, what a political gesture is, what a statement is, and this is who knows who the greatest is? And isn't that like the craziest thing in the world? That someone could actually define them, someone born in the segregated South, a young person in the segregated South could define themselves as the greatest, and all of a sudden, he didn't say he was the greatest boxer. He said he was the greatest of all time. And even as we watched him deteriorate, he's still in our minds the greatest. And so I made this kind of absurd, and I think it's such an absurd statement, but it really speaks to affirmation. And so I made this absurd kind of replica of this kind of absurd statement. And so as the work has matured over the years, I've also started to really think about photographs and how I can start to render small things that we discard into much larger three-dimensional space. And so thinking about photographs, this series called The Punctum, where I'm actually just taking the part of the photograph that really sticks with me and kind of rendering that in 3D space, so I can almost feel like I'm walking into the photograph. So this is a protest in South Africa, which blows my mind that someone would put their arm as they're arrested through a door, knowing that it could be broken, knowing that anything could happen on the other side, but it's also perhaps their last statement to someone else. Or protests where people burn their passbooks, and so basically kind of collectively kind of erasing their government-sanctioned identities and redefining themselves. Or this picture, I call them pictures, from a concentration camp in Auschwitz with these little children's hands on barbed wire. I really started to really think about kind of the power of images and how I can translate them into new things. This is a picture of a person standing on top of the Berlin Wall and someone actually touching that person. And so really this kind of exploration to the next aspect of photography for me as a photographer, how I miss the tactility. That's why I got into it, was the darkroom. And so the last project I wanted to talk to you about is the Truth Booth, which is this modern day confession booth where basically you go into it and it says, touchscreen, it says everyone has their version of the truth, what's yours? Speak for the next 2 minutes, starting with the truth is. And we showed it in Cleveland, in Ireland, and this is in Afghanistan. And it's just this amazing kind of opportunity just to hear people speak on what they think about. And here's what
the truth is not to be discovered because it was there before we were born. It hid itself when we were born, and it only comes out again once we are dead. I'm nearly dead, so the truth will shortly emerge.
I believe the truth is the struggle to find what it really is.
The truth is really small, it's very hard to see, but if you look really, really close, you will find the truth, and it's all around. Thank you.
It is true that I've got a girlfriend that is named Ryan, and it is true that my favorite animal is a dolphin, okay? And that's all I wanted to say.
The truth is, Molly, you're a bitch.
The truth is that I want to be an actor, a dancer, a singer, but I'm not sure how to get into the business. I've joined Trading Places, and well, I've joined the agency of Zare, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get into I am in the agency, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get anything out of it. And I just really want to be an actress especially, or maybe a beautician, or a singer maybe, or maybe a dancer, but I'm not sure how to get in. That's the truth. This was an Excellent Keen production. I want to say hello to Melody, because she's my little doggy, and all my other pets, and my parents. Peace out.
The truth, I believe, is Lego.
Lego.
Lego makes you think small, but believe big. Lego is in all our minds. So the truth is very, very small, but think big. This is my truth.
And so
Thank you.
This is a collaborative project with 2 other artists, but obviously with so far 3,700 other people. And what I love about it is these moments when these 9-year-olds just like rock my world, where all of a sudden I can really think about how anything is. What I love about talking about the truth is actually, our truth is something that no one can refute. And I really believe that, and I've really tried to like show that in my work about elevating different perspectives. And this is a photograph inspired by this is a photograph by Ernest Withers, taken at the Memphis Sanitation Workers March in 1968, and it was taken just 8 years before I was born. And I found it fascinating that it was necessary in this country for people to stand together and affirm their humanity, because the statement I grew up with was not "I am a man," it was "I am the man." And it was fascinating that how during segregation it was this kind of really unified statement to this more selfish statement after segregation, after integration. And so I riffed on that poster in making a series of paintings. And the last line I always like to read as a poem, where it says, "I'm the man, who's the man, you the man, what a man. I am man, I am human, I am many, I am I am, I am amen." And because I realized that perhaps rather than validating myself or anyone else, on anyone else's standards, that maybe my only real true gift is my consciousness or our consciousness. The fact that we can say I am means that we can do whatever we want. And that's kind of what I've learned from being here. And so I hope you all come in and share this conversation with me about how we've made.
Outside?
In all the time we've been doing, I never sit down to Mera decides which way I sit. So
Oh, no, that's okay. You can sit on the outside.
it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. Okay. So who's going to, can I start? Okay. So let's deal with the truth. My truth. The truth is that you, Hank Willis Thomas, changed our lives. Did you hear that? The truth is that The truth is that Hank Willis Thomas changed our life.
Likewise.
Confession should always be very soft.
So you refer to the 4 hours that when we sat, I think it was it was the Raleigh, right?
Yeah.
Kahinda Riley would do his fish fry after Art Basel. So after all the fanciness of Art Basel dinners and exclusive dinners and all of that, he would go fishing, and whatever he caught, he actually found these chefs to cook it up. And it was a really nice way to relax. And we did unfashionably show up very early because we didn't have another invitation. So during that talk, we asked your opinion. And what you said set us on a course which literally changed our life, because the whole 30 American experience, which we asked you, is it possible for us to put together and present and to even go deeper into a collection of African American artists that we had for starting like 30, 40 years before and going forward, to put them all together and then to present that as an exhibition. And it's fun. For us, it was really a big question. And for everyone who talked, to anyone else we talked to, thought that it was a really, really bad idea.
Yeah.
Like a really bad idea.
I remember the question. You basically, you said, is it ghettoizing or is it passé in 2000, this was 2006, to actually make a show of African American artists? Is that something that's limiting to the artists? You know, and you were really said that everyone said, no, you should not do that.
Well, interesting enough, of course, you know, we asked all our white friends first.
Well, what did you say?
I said, well, there's never been a multi-generational kind of survey show of African American artists. Maybe because all the institutions are afraid of that criticism, and because you're doing it out of your own collection, you can do whatever you want. And what was so fascinating is that now that you've done it, how many institutions have already
You know, this show is going to, it's actually in the next, well, it's continuing to travel. Actually, now it's in New Orleans. The show will have been seen by almost 1 million people, and President Obama and his entire family, with the First Lady Michelle Obama, I think, kind of checking it out before she brought her daughters, and found it strangely acceptable. And if any of you have seen the show, you know how disturbing it can be. These are very disturbing, many disturbing images that are extremely provocative.
But it was just fascinating for me at 28, or however old I was, for you all to ask me what I thought about having you doing an exhibition. And I think that's what's so, your whole process, this is your collection, the things you've done, not only with the collection, but even with the hotels, is this art practice. And I think it was fascinating that you're still asking questions of other people, about, how do you, and I think that idea of this openness of communication, and Don challenging it, Mera saying, what do you think? And Don saying, no, that, and these hard questions that he would ask, as it was such a fascinating experience. It kind of gave me comfort in my own skin to voice my opinion.
Well, the interesting thing is, we actually, after speaking with Hank, we actually asked every artist in the exhibition.
It wasn't permission. It wasn't
Not
that
permission, but
No,
we
so
asked
what do
them,
you think?
what do you think?
Right.
And you realize the tremendous step forward that America has made in that all.
No, it's not the computer. It's time to dance.
I could speak over that. All of the young artists in the exhibition were very comfortable in their own skin. And we're very comfortable with saying, yes, this would be a great idea to have a multi-generational show, the first opportunity to see artists. And by the way, many of the artists did not know each other. But they knew of each other, but they didn't know each other personally. And so it was a great moment. But the older generation of artists was actually much more uncomfortable.
You're jumping ahead. Let's stay in this moment.
Jumping ahead of what?
No, I'm saying let's stay. I want to go back. Let's stay in this moment. You know what? By the way, this is not rehearsed, so this could get ugly.
Unscripted.
So, but being that this is our 50th year anniversary, I think we can survive. I think we can survive. I think we will survive.
There's evidence in the room.
So don't get nervous. Don't get nervous. But we haven't interrupted each other yet. I just wanted you to get a real flavor of what it's like. No, I mean, you're jumping forward. I want to stay in this moment where we're on the beach there, no one has arrived yet, and we're literally talking to each other like nobody's there. You know, you have these moments in your life where everyone disappears, you don't hear anything, you don't see anybody. I don't think we even had the fish fry. And we really kept talking because it was the first time, because we really hadn't asked any. I mean, we only talked to people who were not afraid to talk about it too. So we talked to curators. We spoke to some curators. We spoke to some directors. We spoke to white people we knew. But we kind of tried to get our ducks in a row before we actually approached a black person to ask them about this, because it was like so. Everyone thought it was a crazy, wild, dangerous idea. In fact, at the time, our director threatened to quit, which he actually did. I mean, it was really crazy because he thought it was really a crazy thing to do. And here comes Hank and says, "Well, why not have this conversation? Why not
It's never been done before.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah. Why not have a conversation like this?" And so we didn't ask permission from anybody because it was like too lame to ask permission, because it was like our responsibility to take responsibility for it. But then we had these conversations, and like Don said, here I agree with you, that the older generation was resistant. Like Kerry James Marshall actually was the hardest to convince.
No. Glenn Ligon.
Oh, Glenn Ligon too. They all thought like, oh God, and again with this with this ghettoizing. Again, we're in a black show. Let's like open the door to, I want to be, like Glenn said, very nicely, he said, I want to show with Richard Prince. I said, you have shown with Richard Prince. We have put you with Richard Prince. This is something else. It's not like you've been in our shows with other artists. This is a rare opportunity. And it's funny because we kind of felt it in our heart. I don't know, this was right, the show was in the works for, it was like almost was it 2 or 3 years before Obama? There was no Obama on the scene.
No.
But there was a feeling that something was changing. And it's interesting because when we had these, so the show takes place, and of course the show takes place December, and Obama is inaugurated in January, and the show is delayed by a year. But what Hank set in motion was opening the door to a real open and honest conversation, which we would put all these, we had about, we had 80 works of yours.
85 works of mine.
85 works. We had the whole unbranded series. We had Priceless. We had over, the show had, Ron, how many pieces does the show have? 300 works. Which you can just imagine the logistics of traveling it, but it's now, how many venues are we now at? 7 venues. So it's now in New Orleans. It's going to Detroit. It's going to Memphis. It's going to, and it's going to start a whole tour in Europe as well.
So it's been traveling for already 5 years.
It's all of, as I said, it's almost 1 million people have seen it.
I'm not sure I would recognize the works.
I know you're interrupting me, but I'm going to let you.
Oh.
Here. But I was born and raised there and was very active in the museum. Is that where it is?
Is that where it is?
No, it's at the Contemporary Arts Center there.
Okay.
But I have a question. Do you know a good restaurant in New Orleans?
We're going this, we're talking on Thursday, because wherever the show goes, we go and talk to audiences just like this, and all these questions come out. And the most incredible thing is to see what happens when people can actually talk to each other freely. And what every museum has encouraged is these pasties where you can say whatever you want to say. Stickums. Okay, stickums. I'm sorry. Maybe it should be rebranded.
But it's been fascinating because I've also gotten to be invited to, I think, almost every venue.
You were at the Corcoran.
I was at every venue.
Every venue so far.
You spoke in Milwaukee.
No, but it's really fascinating as the institutions, that what you all did gave institutions an opportunity to use their voice. That you know what I mean? They could have had these shows for years and years and years, but they were all afraid to do a show on this scale, invest that much time, energy, money, and effort into showing a broad range of work of African American artists. And so they're like milking it up. They're having these amazing record numbers come to their shows because the black community has felt so alienated by so many museums, and that's what I really think is so exciting.
The incredible thing was in Norfolk, they had these, not pasties, but stickums on the wall. And one of them said, and the priceless piece, you remember, you can't forget that priceless piece. In front of the priceless piece, someone wrote that my grandfather was a slave, and I'm here now. But the more amazing thing is there were people sitting there crying in front of this piece. I mean, it was probably one of the most profound moments I've ever had in an art museum. And I can't help thinking that in a large sense, your practice changed with Unbranded, but then really radically with the death of your cousin. Is that false perception? Or?
Yeah. Up until then, I was making pictures about pictures, like the first few pictures I saw. And that did shift everything in my life, particularly because my whole life, hey, Rosie, was my whole game plan in life was to be my cousin's background singer. So when he died, I actually had to come up with a voice of my own. And so it was this kind of rebirth, but also this responsibility of like, my cousin was killed because he was with some people who were wearing a chain. But people would come up to me and say, "Oh, your cousin was murdered. What did he do?"
Nothing.
Because there's these assumptions about what young black men must do to get in trouble. And so I felt this need to kind of start to really not only question and rethink the construction of black identity, because I like to point out the craziest thing about blackness is that black people didn't create it. The Europeans, with a commercial interest in dehumanizing us, created black people, and we've been charged with trying to make this crazy, weird idea our own. And that's the real problematics in it, that African Americans often don't value each other's lives as much as they do other people's lives, just because the problems with that. So I've really invested in not only breaking the frames and the limitations of the way we see blackness, but also whiteness, but everything is, because we talk about so many things in the U.S. as black and white, but really the majority of the people in the world are Asian, and they range in skin complexion from mine to yours. And so it really kind of blows this question of like either or into a much bigger.
So I have a question. Where are we now compared to where we were, let's say, 6 years ago? Because during the conversations that we had, so what happened is, I think like 24 of the artists of the 30s, actually there were 31 artists in the show, as it turned out, and 24 actually came together. And just randomly, we created small groups depending on who was available when, and we had these conversations. And during these conversations, like you ended up with Carrie Mae Weem, who was your babysitter. Mm-hmm. Go figure that. You can, right? Yeah. It was totally coincidental, and you met a lot of artists that you didn't even know. But anyway, so there was a conversation about the ceiling of somebody like. Who spoke about the ceiling for the $5 million? Barclay Hendricks said a black artist, graduate of Yale, he graduated like in the 70s. His ceiling for art was $5,000. His art would only sell up to $5,000, and he knew it. He said that was just a given. And these are the kind of conversations that came out in these talks that we had. So, and then Jason got into a big...
There's Jason over there.
Jason's there. Do you remember, Hank, do you remember the argument that Jason got into with Kerry James Marshall? You heard about it. So Kerry James Marshall went on and on to agree that there was a ceiling, there is a ceiling, and there always will be a ceiling for African American artists for selling art. And Jason said, there's a new day. You got to see it. You got to feel it. That's why we're doing the show. There's a new day. It's coming. It's like right here, right now. In fact, there are people like Hank Willis Thomas, Micheline Thomas, even Rashid Johnson. I mean, people really want to buy their work, and it's already happening, like right here, right now. You don't make those statements. I mean, you're kind of behind the times a little bit, and he was very upset at that. Do you remember that, Jason? Yes. He didn't say it quite that way, but it was a turning. So my question to you is, that was a reality, and there was a prediction of what was to come. We're here 5-6 years later. What has happened to you as an artist, and what do you feel is happening to the other artists who were emerging?
Yeah, I think, and quote unquote emerged. I mean, we definitely see with Barclay Hendricks this amazing kind of really major reinvestment in his work. There was a big show that Trevor Schoonmaker did that started at the Nasher Museum, and so many other artists who hadn't gotten their due, like who passed away? Robert Colescott.
And a local,
Purvis Young. So many of the older artists whose work was not shown in a broader spectrum. I see them now in museums all over the country, all over the world. We know that now Rashid is one of the most celebrated artists in the world. And
I have to apologize for one thing.
What?
She's never apologized to me. I can't wait to...
Well, that's how you make 50 years.
You know, we put Rashid's image on the cover, right? I know. I just want to say, please forgive me.
No, Rashid is what's.
Please forgive me. It took me a long time because it was like, it was very, for the longest time we really wanted
to put branded head on
the branded head on it.
Which was wrong.
Okay. Well, I will say that.
I mean, I think not the least reason that Puma was sponsoring the show. And the Nike swish was not going to go far.
But no, I forgot that you also are the reason that me and Rashid have become good friends, because they asked us to do a collaboration for the show. And we've been good friends ever since. But so many relationships were born out of it. And what I really think is fascinating with the 30 Americans exhibition is that it kind of, a lot of institutions like Rosie Gordon-Wallace, who I mentioned from Diaspora Vibe, have been doing work of promoting work of artists of color over a long, long period of time and have not gotten the attention that really came through you all investing in it as people who, quote unquote, didn't identify as black, but at the same time had created this opportunity that made museums wake up and really
start to Hank, just...
Can I go back to your work for 1 minute?
Sure.
I'd rather attack you than if you look at your work sequentially, early on you were dealing in a sense with the exploitation of the black, whether as an athlete in ball and chain with the Nike swish. Then along came Priceless, but now with questions, the question purge. All of a sudden there's an attempt to in a sense bridge the culture and to incorporate everybody into the same cultural milieu. Is that my imagination or is that an active part of it?
Yeah, well, Don's talking about another project of mine called Question Bridge Black Males, which is a collaboration that was inspired by one of my former professors, Chris Johnson. But basically we started off with asking 160 African American men to ask and answer each other's questions, because we as black men really wanted to know, like, you know, if anybody should know what black maleness is about, we should know. And we actually found out.
Golden.
Yeah, right. But we actually realized that we actually couldn't come up with a consensus by asking. We just asked African American men to ask and answer each other's questions, and by the nature of that, you realize that there's as much diversity within any demographic as there is outside of it. And so when I say that what would have been wrong about putting branded head on the cover of your catalog, it would have been assuming that all African Americans have to deal with the same mentality that, you know, maybe someone of my generation or other generations, or, you know, just different places deal with. And so what I'm really more invested in is showing that, you know, just because, for instance, you know, the limited perspectives we have kill people, like what we saw with Trayvon Martin, that someone didn't just see a kid walking through his neighborhood, they saw a young black youth with a hoodie. And that signifies danger. But how many other African American kids wear hoodies? How many kids wear hoodies that aren't, you know, and the fact that we can't just see a black person as a person, we see them, and that's what I thought was brilliant about 30 Americans, in that, you know, when you named it 30 Americans, it didn't say 30 black Americans, it was just like 30 Americans, and you figure out why.
I'll never forget I'll never forget that, because it was.
I was against that for the record.
Well, it was a tear from my, because I called you on the phone. Do you remember? I called you on the phone. I said, because, you know, for 3 years we kept struggling with a name. We just couldn't come up with the right name. Then, you know, everybody was, you know, the family, everyone was looking for the appropriate name, and. A member of our team said, you know, the Museum of Modern Art would have these exhibitions over the years, like 15 artists, you know, it was 15, you know, Americans, 15 Americans. Of course, or I don't know, it was 15 Americans, but it was never like, the Americans were always white and they were always male. So the idea that, but anyway, I'll never forget the phone call I made to you. I don't know if and I said, Hank, we have a name that feels, what do you think, you know?
And I was like, nah.
But on the other hand, you said, I don't know, something about, wow, I guess I am an American. It was like,
It definitely, and that's what I'm saying, it actually broadened my own perspective, because I had been trapped in this box that America had put me in as a black person, rather than thinking of myself as a person and thinking about myself as an American. Which increasingly that's what I think part of my pursuit to be, and hopefully I'm not just an American. I'm like I said,
a human being out there. But I want to go back to the question. What is the ceiling? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
There is, think about that question. I was somewhere, and I was speaking to a writer from Art in America. He was talking about the most recent auctions. That, do you remember whose painting sold for? Joe Mitchell's painting sold for $11 million, which was, I guess, the highest that a woman's painting had ever sold for at auction. And of course, he's passed away, so it's different. But as an African-American artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat's work is in the 20s. And so you start to realize that there are some African-Americans who are actually kind of moving into this kind of upper echelon of commercial success or validation. But there also, you see, women are still half, even the most privileged of women are still half of where this kind of, and so I feel like there's this amazing, so I think these pies can be sliced any number of ways. It will only be successful for me when we don't have to wonder or assume that it's a white male, or we have to say that it's a black male, or that it's an Asian American woman, or Korean artist. That it can just be this person's work is about this, and I think that's what I think is so exciting about a lot of the work that I saw of my peers and 30 Americans and other artists, that they're not making work about black people like a lot of my work has been. They're just making work that African Americans or black people are in, and it's your prejudice that limits it. And I think
I do think that I think people own a certain territory in a way. I mean, I think you have being black gives you a territory that, as a white person, I don't think I could touch. Or would I just wouldn't, it's just like territory of dealing with the Holocaust, for example. I mean, even though Kiefer did that, but he was like...
And I'm starting to do that.
And you're starting... No, I'm saying it's like, it's not an easy place to go, because some subject is like yours. Like a woman can deal with, pasties. What pasties?
Mm-hmm,
not pasties or pasties. Okay. But that's very, very strong. That's really powerful, because even in the case of someone like Len Ligon, I mean, he's such a conceptual artist. It's like they're like these powerful abstractions, right? But yet the color he uses, the language, where he borrows, what he steals, because Picasso said, good artists borrow and great artists steal. He does, but he's a conceptual artist, and he definitely belongs with Richard Prince. That totally, in terms of that conversation about how powerful language is in terms of not just the graphic, but as a delivering the message. But who else could deliver that message?
But I think it would be a terrible, terrible mistake for anyone to give up who they are, because that's the strongest thing they have.
Like I think you're saying,
whether it's Kiefer dealing with his German past, whether it's you dealing with the history of the black in America, to make white bread out of it would be a terrible mistake. I think you have to make things with global interest, but you never should give up local.
This is like a studio critique. What I would say. Donna, what about what I want to say? I heard you. Oh, okay.
Well, I think what I've learned through Question Bridge actually is that there are many more me's, and that's what that piece, the Wayfarer is. There are many more me's inside me than I actually see, and so what I'm really interested in doing is like, if I was raised in part by a Jewish woman, does that just because I don't have that blood, does that not become
it weighs into who you are?
And so I'm really starting to really think about.
But Hank,
kind of,
you saved our life, because you set us on a course that has really made a difference in our life. And I think your work, just judging from the power of your appearances, the power of your work, and all the museums that I have, that I've been following, you are changing people's lives with the history you're teaching them, the identity, their own identity that they can now talk about. I feel like you can.
But that's the difference between your generation and the generation that went before. your generation doesn't work
Well,
with a
you
chip
feel
on
the
this
freedom.
soldier.
You feel
I got
the
the chip.
freedom.
I carry the chip. But that's because of my relationship with my mom. But that's what I noticed, that so many of my other peers, they don't have a chip on their shoulder.
What's
and
your
that's
chip?
beauty.
What do you mean?
I
What's your
think
chip?
especially when I go to Africa and I deal with contemporary artists or people, just youth living in Africa, they don't have the same chip on the shoulder African Americans have, because they, and that's some of the beauty that I've learned, in that I can actually not just, it's not always good, so frequently as African Americans, because our legacy supposedly only begins with slavery, we have to carry this baggage, whereas some people are like, when are you going to put it down? And that, it's not a surprise that so many of the more successful artists of my generation are Africans in the United States, like Wageshi, like Kehinde, who have, and a growing list of others, who have a much broader, more global perspective of what it means to be black, rather than just the specific African American perspective. And that's what I'm
That's
moving
fascinating, actually. But it's
I just want to, this was like if we were in the studio, I'd say, you're really changing people's lives. I just think you're changing people's lives because the history you're giving them gives them. History. It's not just you're not just giving history to black people. You're giving history to everyone. You're teaching. You're really teaching, and that's powerful. That's powerful.
To get an idea of the extent that Question Bridge has affected people, how many people have seen this?
Over 400,000 people, and it's been like 30 museums and galleries across the country.
And that's an astonishing.
It's a 3-hour video installation, which when we made it, we edited it in like 5 parts, 5-minute bites, because I'm like, if I really love a video installation, I'll watch it for like 2 minutes, because who has the time? But according to the museums, on average, like 45, people watch it for on average 45 minutes, and people come back and watch the whole 3 hours. And what happens is you realize that Question Bridge Black Males isn't just about black men, it's about people, and what happens when people are put into groups, how they relate to the notion of this group, and how they relate to others within the group, and how they feel about what others outside of the group think of them. So people who don't identify as African American men get to be a fly on the wall in a conversation that they don't normally feel welcome to, but also African American men also start to feel validated that a lot of the ways that they can see, I disagree with this guy, black guy over here, and this black guy over here I agree with, and this kind of guy I kind of agree with, and so we don't have to all be, like, one African American doesn't have to represent every other.
By the way, Hank, how is Miami treating?
Question Bridge Black Males, and we just launched Question Bridge, but we just launched an actually interactive website to broaden that conversation. It's fascinating.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and I'm sure you have questions now that we've bored you with our questions. So if anyone has any questions, please.
Can I ask the mirror, do you have one last question? Just out of curiosity.
Never has a last question.
You said, what is Miami?
I don't know. This might be a hot subject, but how is Miami treating you? What's your impression of Miami, and how does it treat you?
I said, like I said, because of you, Rosie, and Christina, and also Jason and Michelle over there, I have a very skewed vision of Miami. I don't get the same story that most people say, because even if I don't talk to...
What does most people say?
Most people, it's like, it's Miami. It's, loud, and nobody cares, and there's this other stuff, but I've had a select few warm relationships with people who I can, even if I don't talk to them all the time, I know that they have my back, which is, you can't ask for more.
You're beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you leave, does anybody have any questions, either for Donna Mera or for Hank Willis Thomas?
Thank you so much.
10 questions. Before you leave, Hank, perhaps I can ask you a question. I'm curious about the kind of language you use in your work that specifically speaks to advertising, billboards, that kind of thing. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
As I stated, I think of advertising as the most ubiquitous language in the world, and so the fact that it is underused, in my opinion. The fact that I'm like, why can't I use this language to talk about other things? Because people will get it. The thing that I love about advertisements is even if you don't want to read it, you've already read it. That's what's so fascinating at using it as a language. And that's kind of what I'm drawn to, and kind of getting into our subconscious, because they usually work in our subconscious. That's how Apple went from being 7% of the market to being like the center of it.
Anybody else have any questions? We have a question over here.
I have a question about the hands of the young children in the concentration camps. Where is the idea coming from?
So recently I just had a show in South Africa, and I chose to make a show about 20th century iconography and images in South Africa, and then had a show just after that about Berlin. And a lot of my relationship to understanding Germany is through the photographs, and especially the photographs of the major events of the Holocaust, but also the breaking down of the Berlin Wall.
I'm asking the question because I do know quite a bit about the Holocaust, being Israeli, being Jewish, and so on. But it is not reality. In other words, children did not get to touch the barbed wires.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking, where the idea is from. So by the time someone, whether it's an adult or a child, will get to the barbed wire, they'll be dead a long way before they get to the barbed wires. So where's the idea coming from?
Well, it's coming from a photograph, but I can only assume, because the photograph is not documented, but that it comes from, most of the images that we see of people in the concentration camps came right at the point of liberation. So up until that point,
afterwards.
It was at the moment when American GIs came in and these people were like beginning to be freed. That was the moment.
And am I right? Did you all these hands were black?
No, they were all. Do
I remember it correctly? I may be wrong.
No, they were in this photograph, and I sometimes want to just bring the photograph. No, it's a black. They're dirty, but they're European kids. But what I first noticed when I look at the picture is their eyes, but then as I studied it more and more, I started to think about that tension of these delicate little hands on barbed wire, and so casting it in bronze and in that way, for me was
bronze.
It was bronze, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Don and Mera, last year your exhibition addressed China. Do we get a sneak peek of what this year's exhibition is going to be, or no?
If I tell you, I have to kill you.
What about the rest of us?
No, but okay. So here's the challenge this year. In fact, the video that we were just talking about. Is it an addition piece? Is it a unique piece?
No, it's an addition.
It's an addition piece?
Let's talk about it later.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so what we're thinking this year, so Don and I are trying to figure out how we're going to celebrate the 50 years.
Oh, wow.
He offered me a big diamond. He offered me, yeah, right. He offered me, 50 years is gold, and I don't know, he offered me a big car, a plane, a train.
A hotel.
So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is put together an exhibition of artists that do what they always do for us. They shake our world. They make magic. And so hopefully when you come this coming year, you're going to see the magic that a 50-year-old couple can still have in the privacy, wait a minute, in the privacy of our public museum. So please come, It could get a little kinky.
Trouble.
And that's trouble. But I'm just thinking that, we have to talk about that.
Well, I'm excited by the idea because we've been wanting to go. We've showed it so many states. Like we've shown it in 30 states. We showed it in Edenville, Florida, We've never shown
But
it
you
down
haven't
here.
shown it in Miami.
No.
Okay. So this is how we find magic. You never know when it's going to hit you over the head. And sometimes it's an artist that we don't know, and it's and sometimes it's an artist who continues work. There's, by the way, an artist here from Israel, Gil. Stand up, talking about the Holocaust. You cannot imagine, it's funny because you've dealt with barbed wire and a crib, and he addresses the subject of the Holocaust. I mean, it's interesting, there's a new generation, including Germans, who are saying, let's revisit a painful time in history. And you don't have to be Jewish. In this case, Gil is an Israeli artist and he is Jewish, but you don't have to be Jewish to try to explore the pain in the world. It's pretty common. So Gil has a show right now at Ronald Feldman. We were just there for the opening. Unbelievable. We met Gil about 4 years ago. Don and I went to Israel to play the Maccabi games. He won, I lost. But we met him, and now he has this incredible show. He makes the most painful sculpture he crochets, like that used to be the territory of women only, right? He crochets the most incredible, painful objects of history.
So it is about, like, we begin to own other aspects.
Exactly.
Wait, how do you say your whole name?
Gil Yefman.
How do
If
you
you're
spell
in New York, check it out.
How do you spell it? Y-E-F-M-A-N.
Y-E-F-M-A-N.
So Google.
Is there any other artist here that I should mention, that I know? I'll make mention. Well, I had to mention Gil because he's here doing a residency, and it's a beautiful thing how the community here actually supports artists coming here, like Robert and
Catherine.
And Mario. They actually pay for artists to come here from around the world to do projects here, and we get to know each other that way. So had Gil not come, he wouldn't know Hank, and now you know Hank, and now you know Gil, so, all right. You're very welcome.
And I think that Mera and Don might have just told us what their next show is going to be. But anyway, thank you all so much for coming this evening. It's such a privilege to have you all here. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm very proud of you, Claire, an intern. 5 years ago?
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
5 years ago.
5 years ago. Thank you very much for coming. Please give Don and Mera and Hank a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.